Someday I'll get a different entry music, but this one is good, and my producer Ben says that it's good.
Very
So,
professional.
I am your voice of the resistance, perhaps, Chad Kirshner, and I'm here today with Mr. Craig Fitzgerald to talk about electrification, dispelling some myths, finding out what grinds his gears, and as my favorite masshole, which I believe I can say without bleeping,
Absolutely.
then I feel like there's a lot of things that perhaps grind your gears. So welcome. Thanks for joining us, Craig,
Thanks,
especially
Chad.
on kind of
Yeah,
short notice.
it's always fun to talk to you because I think you and I think exactly the same about this, and it's funny because like look at me, right? My demographic is the kind of person who is angry that EVs exist,
Right.
but I'm here to tell you that as much of a vintage car person as I am,
Hmm.
I don't think there's ever been a more exciting time in this industry for me.
Oh,
It
for
really is
sure.
fascinating.
Yeah, covering this industry now is like no other time.
Yeah,
And I've been told by that from people who have been around doing this a lot longer than I have.
yeah.
What's interesting though is, yeah, you're right. Perhaps your demographic wouldn't naturally gravitate to this, but I, I feel like your journey into understanding and appreciating electrification probably came through your butt being in a seat. I don't know, maybe if you were skeptical or not, but once you sort of experienced it and lived with it, you're like, oh, hey, this makes sense, right? I
That's
mean,
absolutely right. And it shouldn't be ironic to anyone that the loudest critics of EVs and the loudest, people who don't want them to exist at all are people who have never been in one.
right,
That I mean, they'll avoid it like the plague. It's like, what do you so? Why do you care if
right.
you're not being made to own one of these things? Then what is it to you? And I look at it like I'm going to do whatever my entertainment is. I'm going to do that in a gas powered vehicle. It's
Yeah,
fun. I love
sure.
old stuff. I have a 66 CJ5, enjoy that a lot. But the day to day commute, which should be the worst part of anybody's day,
Yes,
you, you,
it is.
you would not, there is no advantage to having a gas powered car at this point,
No, no,
you know?
especially I mean, for a lot of reasons, but it also just like doesn't matter. What if you're creeping along at 5 miles an hour?
Yeah.
Does it really matter what's propelling you? It could be a hamster on a
Yeah.
wheel, and it would be, perfectly fine.
Well, I'll give you an
Um,
example. Yesterday, I had to go to a doctor's appointment in Wellesley, which is 13 miles from here. It took me an hour to get 13 miles. I could have done it faster on a bicycle.
right,
And, in an EV, it's quiet. It just sits there. It's not annoying to listen to. They're
right.
sort of uniformly comfortable. And the thing that I found in the first one that I drove was the Leaf in 2010 or 11 or whenever that came out.
Yeah, around then.
You know, I looked at it like in a lot of ways that was the Leaf was a wrong step, right? Because it was what the industry always does. It's like, oh, you want to save fuel? We're going to give you that, but we're going to give it to you in the worst possible platform we can, the cheapest, like
Right.
chintziest little car we can. And still, that car felt like a premium automobile to me because there
Yes.
wasn't some buzzy four-cylinder engine working away under the hood,
Right.
and that was the moment that I've been interested since 2011 because of that.
Well, I was talking on a previous episode, I think is the way these are going to air, with Robbie Baldwin,
Yeah,
and his partner, she was really skeptical before they bought their first EV. Um, and then he ended up leasing something that I think at 256 miles, so either like a Nero or something along those lines.
yeah,
And she had range anxieties, like she was really, really concerned. And I guess he was saying the other day, they drove by a Fiat 500e, one of the first gens,
yeah,
that was on sale for like 8 grand. And she's like, why don't we just buy that? He's like, it's got 86 miles of range. She's
right.
like, That's all we drive. Like we don't need more than that. So like she went from being not necessarily a hater, but somebody really skeptical,
Yep.
because she didn't necessarily realize how much she drives,
Yep.
and and is now like, why would I have anything else? Now, I think you're absolutely right. For I think you're absolutely right saying that for fun cars and things like that, I think internal combustion can still make a lot of sense there. I mean, Craig, um, has a 36 Ford that he restored, I believe, with his dad. It's a fantastic car,
Yeah.
but like, it is not, it isn't it's not what you would expect from
It's
somebody hosting an EV channel
right.
necessarily. But we're all car enthusiasts. We're all enthusiasts. So like, what's it matter?
Well,
You
yeah,
know?
and when you think about what, leaving out the full size pickups for a minute because that's its
Yeah,
own segment. Every other popular vehicle, Toyota RAV4, Honda CRV, Nissan Rogue, these are not entertaining vehicles to drive. They're
right.
fine, they do what they do, they're reliable, they're safe. That's all anybody cares about.
Yeah,
And you can do the same thing with an EV,
yeah,
get the same experience as far as safety and technology and usefulness and all that,
hmm
but in a package that doesn't require us to distill as much gasoline as we have to today. I mean, it's
yeah,
insane. The numbers, like, it's hundreds of millions of barrels of oil a day to fuel this constant need for gasoline. And
yeah,
if we can eliminate 20% of that,
yeah.
like, I don't think
No,
anybody's in our lifetime, anyways, anybody's saying like nobody's going to be driving gas powered cars. I mean, states can enact
yeah,
whatever they want to, but the reality is that that's not going to happen in our
right.
lifetime. So what
Yeah,
are we
I
worried
mean,
about? What do we care?
well, there's a lot of, I mean, there's obviously a lot of people on the internet who are like, oh, well, this is a slippery slope leading to this mandate and this mandate. And like, well, eh, part of me is like, yeah, the government should stay out of my business. But like, I also think the government is like, should mandate some things.
Yeah,
Like safety, like the FDA, I think matters. Like I think there's things that matter, and I think there's certain mandates that matter. I think the government should step in for public health good.
yeah,
It's gonna make me sound like a tree hugging hippie, but like, I think there is room for a government in certain areas. And honestly, I wouldn't be mad at an EV mandate. I really wouldn't.
right.
There's a lot of things that need to be solved before that happens, infrastructure pricing and things like that.
Right.
But I, the
Well, when
government,
you
you,
so
you can't smoke anywhere in public
right.
anymore. Pretty much anywhere in this country for for public health reasons. You fly to Europe and you're just like, it's like it feels like an entirely different planet.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
right. You walk
so
off the plane in Germany, and
yeah,
the airport is like, wow, everybody just on the planet chose to smoke here. It's been a while. I don't
right.
know if they still allow that, but if the
It's
last time I
you
went,
still you still notice it. I
yeah,
mean, the last time I was in
yeah.
Europe, like just you notice it.
So this is an interesting experience. Uh, She's 6 or 7 years ago. We talked about this the last time you and I spoke, but I went to Havana with Ray Magliazzi from Car Talk.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And so the very first thing that I noticed when I got off the plane there, I was like, God, this place smells like Boston did in the 70s. And it was because everything is an unfiltered diesel there.
right.
Everything,
Okay,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So all of the cars that you see running around, the 50s American cars that got left there, they're all powered by Kia and Hyundai diesels, four
Okay.
cylinders with a 5-speed manual transmission that's somehow mated to a column shift. That's really wild, the innovations that these people have
Oh, I've
done
seen
to
some.
keep
Yeah,
those things going. But the government bought them, all these diesel engines, in the 90s and early 2000s. They imported hundreds of thousands of them and essentially gave them away. So
Right.
all of their buses, all of their cars are diesels, and there's a haze over the entire city. That's it's you can taste it,
Right.
and that is what Boston felt like in the 70s and the early 80s.
Right.
It doesn't feel that way anymore. And the reason for that is because we got smart about what would to allow most people to drive around.
Right.
We
Yeah.
the improvement is drastic. Like I
Yeah.
can't tell you how filthy that city was. I mean, and not just like the air quality, but that stuff clung to everything. It was a dirty city, and it's just
Well,
not
there,
that way anymore.
well, there's a lot of people. I mean, yes, there's people now who don't remember it in LA, but like,
Yeah,
people my age, a little bit older, I mean, they remember a Los Angeles that was nearly as bad.
right.
We talk about the smog and stuff now because it still is bad, but it's nothing like it was in the
Oh
80s.
yeah,
And you watch like an 80s movie that takes place in LA or was
it's
shot in
yellow.
LA, it's yeah, yeah, the whole thing is just yellow
Yeah,
and it's gross. So like in the textbook academic definition of capitalism, which as somebody who has an MBA, we spent a lot of time talking about how to work in a capitalist environment. Um, there should be businesses competition should breed a higher standard
right,
of ethics and controls and safety and stuff like that because academics, at least on paper, you would think that people would want and gravitate towards the safer the safer stuff, the friendlier stuff, the healthier stuff. And in some segments, I think that's the case,
they don't
but
with cars. They
they don't with cars
Yeah,
at all. And there is when you then add in the stock market, which trades on fear and greed. I mean, that is
yeah,
something you'd learn. Like it's either trading on fear or on greed, and there's an index that tracks this. Um, when you are beholden to shareholders, a lot of these are institutional investors, then the desire is and the goal is to drive costs down to increase
right.
profit and then continuously grow. So that kind of in some ways that jives with the idea, or doesn't jive with the idea of capitalism as in raising boats, which it should, but that's not how people buy, and
Right.
that's not how businesses make money. Now, yes, I could blame a lot on Ronald Reagan, and I'm not going to talk about politics
Yeah.
here, but like it's interesting because we talk about being in like this late stage capitalism, and people are like, well, drill baby drill, we don't need these regulations, stay out of or whatever. But it's it there is a need, I think, for government to step in certain places to protect the common, to protect common good. I think the Clean Air Act is good.
Yeah.
Perfect? No. Perfect? No. Good? Yes.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of tankies on the internet that want that let perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
like a vegetarian. Like you were talking about a little bit about reducing 20% emissions, like whatever. Like the idea of being a vegetarian one day a week. So if you just cut one day of meat out of yours, you don't need to go vegetarian.
right.
Just one day a week, you don't eat meat. Like global CO2 emissions drop fairly
Yeah.
significantly because the largest pollution is commercial food production, commercial farming.
Right.
A cow is way, I mean, Jeremy Clarkson has said this more than once. Cow is way worse for the environment than a car is
Yeah.
in terms of emissions.
Right.
And I don't know about whole life cycle. That probably haven't done the math on that, but it's true. Methane is bad for the environment, and cows spew methane out of both
Right.
ends. And
Well, and we're as addicted to beef as we are to gasoline,
yeah,
so it's
also
like,
also true.
yeah.
But this idea again of perfect being the enemy of the good, like we don't need everybody to go
Right.
to go vegan. Like that isn't viable. It's just not
Right.
viable. But you know, take meat out of your diet once a week, and you do that at scale. That's valuable. You cut your daily commuting that you drive. Oh well, I've already got two cars in the household, and one just does the commuting. Well, make that the EV.
Right. Right.
and
And
you dramatically.
there I've been saying this for a while too. Like Boston is, Massachusetts during the Baker administration, they, um, we decided that Boston was going to be carbon neutral by 2050. And I think you and matter of fact, I think I wrote something for you about this where like,
Mhm.
look, there's a lot of plans here. There are a lot of plans for like, last mile delivery and, people using bicycles and people using public transportation and people, driving, EVs into Boston. That's not the answer. The answer is just to not drive into Boston.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what the promise of things like Zoom and things like Teams and this conversation
Hmm.
that you and I are having, 800 miles away from each other,
Yep.
is that's the promise of technology, is that you don't have to drive into Boston every day. So
Right.
but we can't get over that. We cannot get. We've seemed to, for a little while, we were like, hey, anybody can work from anywhere. And now
Yep.
we're kind of going back in the other direction where people got to, drive from here into the seaport in Boston, which is the most like congested place in the state. And they have to do it
Yep.
every day at the expense of an hour and a half of their own time and the
Hmm.
fuel required to get there.
Yep.
It's insane when you think about it that we continue
Yeah.
to do
Well,
this.
well, and that's one of the things too. Like we aren't. I'm not necessarily a pro car person.
Yeah.
Um, where I live, it's a necessity, and there's cars that I like.
Yeah.
Like, don't get me wrong, but I don't think a car makes sense in Manhattan.
Yeah. Right.
I don't necessarily think a car makes sense in Boston. Um, the last time I was in New York, in the city proper, I was at the Wagoneer S reveal, and the night before, I got there early. The night before, we went to Katz's
Yeah.
because,
Of course.
as one does when they're in New York, and my friend slash colleague at ABC News Radio, who's done some stuff I've done some stuff for before. I was like, hey, come meet us at Katz's, and like his office is in like Midtown ish,
Yep.
and like it didn't take him long to get there. Like he
No.
took one or two trains, and like it wasn't any much longer than what a taxi ride would have been.
Right.
It was a heck of a lot, a heck of a lot cheaper. And it's and now that Manhattan doesn't have nearly as many cars on it, like there's lots of room for walking and
Yep.
biking, and it doesn't feel you can cross the street and not feel like you're gonna die.
Right.
Which is occasionally you'll still get the hey I'm walking here
Yeah.
kind of thing, but like and congestion charging, it's not there to make money, it's there to encourage people to to not but then you have corporations that want people to come into the office because they're paying these
Right.
fancy expensive rents,
Right.
and they don't want to rezone it for residential because it's cheaper to leave the building empty than it is to rent it
Yeah.
out. Like it's that I've
It's
seen some very weird math on corporate on corporate rentals,
yeah.
and it's wild. I stumbled into like a TikTok trend of like these guys explaining, oh, this is what you should do if you can't lease out your building. No, don't convert it to residential because blah blah blah. Just leave it empty and take this tax and
Yep.
write this off. And people in
It's
the comments
occurring in
and the people in
Boston
the
now.
comment,
Like there's a program in the city to convert a lot of office space to residential, and the city is offering tax breaks to do it, and they're having a
yeah,
hard time getting these companies to do it for exactly
yeah,
that reason. They're better off just taking a tax write off on it, and
yeah. And
it's
I mean that kind of loophole needs, in my opinion, that kind of loophole needs to be closed
yeah,
because it because densely densely populated urban areas mean that you can make a city walkable.
yeah,
If you don't necessarily need a car if everything is within a block or two of where you are. So you don't even so if Boston or New York was like, look, we really want to get rid of, I mean, not get rid of cars, but really reduce the impact of cars, like you need walkable environments, you need people living closer,
yep,
you need people living closer together,
Yep.
um, for that to work.
Yeah, and I
And I
mean
know that
you
like
can you so like for example, I live 26 miles from the city of Boston. The marathon starts through the woods from my house. So it's 26 miles into the city.
okay,
And, that may take you 90 minutes to do,
yeah,
and you can't do it. You can do it on public transportation, but public transportation is crazy expensive here
okay,
and not terribly reliable. So what happens is, my wife has to go into to the city once every pay period. She works for the state.
okay,
So, every time her thing is like, well, I can take the train, but the limitations on taking the train are like, you have to, it is a specific time you need to do it. It's expensive, and it
yeah,
doesn't really get you to your office. It gets you pretty close, but then you're
yeah,
on your own from there.
yeah,
So the idea that you're going to commute into the city from the suburbs and not do it with a car, that's kind of
right,
not possible.
yeah.
So if
I
they're
mean, there,
unless you're going to allow people to work somewhere else.
yeah, I mean, you could do things like maybe have a moto compacto,
Yeah.
or an electric scooter or something like that to kind of help you with that last
Yep.
mile
But
and
there's no
that first
parking.
mile.
See, that's the thing.
But yeah,
Like,
there's no place to
it
leave
would
it.
be
Yeah,
great. It would be amazing if there were satellite lots in Newton, for example, right? Where you
mhm,
could roll in from Framingham, leave a car in
yep,
Newton, and then finish the last 11 miles into the city. There is
right,
not, and they will never in Newton allow that to happen. Like, they're
yeah,
not interested in that. They have to be forced to do it. So that's the kind of thing where, that's I think what you and I are talking about is like, we need government mandates for a lot of things in order to
yeah,
make things happen.
yeah,
And even when we do, we just fight tooth and nail over it. We're fighting in this state all over the place because there's now a mandate that if you're an MBTA adjacent community, then you have to have a section of your town that has multi-use zoning. So, you've got retail on one floor, you've got,
yeah,
residential on the second, which is the way every town used to be
yeah,
forever. If you want to make America great again, turn it into Concord in,
yeah,
1750, because that's the way people used to live, right? We don't
yep,
want that anymore, apparently, out here in the suburbs. So every one of these towns is fighting it.
yeah,
And it's going to I guarantee you, it's going to turn into a Supreme Court fight. And we're going to be doing this. We're going to be fighting about this for 25 years,
yeah,
simply trying to improve the housing crisis in the state
mhm,
and the number of miles that people drive a car. It's
yeah.
two things that we know are good things to do, and we resist it like the plague. And I don't get it. I just don't understand it.
Yeah, when I had a friend that used to work in the Pentagon, and he lived in Fairfax, Virginia. So he would drive the few miles to the farthest out train station, metro station,
Yep.
and then rode the metro the rest of the way. So it was a multi kind of commute. Like he did have to drive for a bit, but that metro station at the end of the line had a massive parking lot.
Yeah.
So for everybody in Virginia that didn't live closer or didn't live walkable to their metro stop, could go to the Vienna station
Right.
and park in this massive parking lot, and then go in the city that
Yep.
way. Um, but downtown DC was the only city that I've ever seen where I've seen HOV lanes that require three people in the car,
Yeah.
not two. And like that's hardcore.
Yep.
That's the real deal.
Well,
But
the thing with all of this, as we kind of go through this, like, we were talking before about like how people were upset about the existence of EVs, not that they
yeah,
might want to drive one, but just that they exist at all. And I've paid attention to this industry for most of my life. I was, I read car magazines when I was a kid.
um,
You know, Even before I started doing this 25 years ago, every single innovation that has ever come along in the automotive industry, fuel injection, electronic ignition, turbocharging, ABS,
Mm.
airbags, every single one is met with a wall of disinformation
Yeah.
about how dangerous it is and how unsafe it is and how bad it is for society. And,
Mhm.
it's insane. It's insane. And now I
Well, you
think
take
I think what it is just everything is amplified now, and everything is like
yeah,
everybody's got an audience. So these things that didn't have as much of an audience before kind of got, it's like, yeah, 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 crazy people, whatever. Hand out
yeah,
your mimeograph sheets to each other, and that's
right,
the network that you
right.
have, right? But
The, the
now it's just
the world is
amplified.
flat.
Yeah, right.
The world's flat, right?
Right.
Like Robbie and I were talking about this. Before you had to really work to find other people who thought the world is flat.
Yep.
Now you have the internet,
Yep.
and there's whole groups of people out there that are just like, will feed into that conspiracy. But I mean, I know people today in the year 2024 that won't wear their seatbelt because they're worried that they're going to end up in a river.
No, no. Hey,
And
it's way better to be thrown clear of the crash.
yeah,
That's what you want to happen. You want to get
there's
tossed out the
that.
window.
Yep, there's that, or again, like I said, people afraid they're going to go off a bridge into a river. Well, our infrastructure is bad, so I mean,
Yeah,
I wouldn't necessarily trust the guardrail on a
yeah.
lot of our bridges. But when are you going to end up in a river
Doesn't actually
compared
happen that
to
often, does it?
compared to the number of times that you're not in a river
Right.
and you're in a car wreck, where all of those safety features are designed to work together? The airbags are dependent on seatbelt
Right.
usage. Like an airbag is they because otherwise they
It's
would
called
engineer it
supplemental for a
differently.
reason.
Yes, it's not there to be the main thing to
Right.
stop you. And um so there's a lot of pushback there. But like now, the EV transition, like battery fires. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, those are terrifying. Yes, ending up upside down in a river, not being able to get out is terrifying. Being in a car on fire is terrifying. Battery fires don't happen that
Nope.
often. They're slower to start burning. Yes, they take more to put out, but you typically have more time to clear the car, and there's a lot more engineering going involved into making a battery pack not catch fire,
Right.
especially in a crash, compared to what automakers can do with a big huge tank of explosive fuel in the
The
back.
National
Right, like
Fire
it's
Protection Association will tell you that the instances of EVs catching on fire randomly are, you know, orders of magnitude less than a gas fire.
yep,
So Haggerty, right, which is the vintage car, insurer that everybody, most people use.
yep,
Um, I interviewed one of their actuaries of quite a while ago. It was probably 10 years ago. And it was about a guy who had a collection of vehicles in Canada, like 20 something vehicles in a garage, none of them insured, that burned flat to the ground. And this guy
right,
told me, he was like, you know what? We pay out on fires like 100 times more than we pay out on crashes. They happen all the time. It
right,
will, like, cars, storing a car in a garage. It's a good opportunity to burn your house flat to the ground.
right.
But so here's the thing with seatbelts too, right? Uh, not many people know that in Massachusetts we had to pass a seatbelt law twice.
Okay,
We passed one in 1986,
okay,
and everybody was like, "All right, whatever, we're wearing seatbelts now." And there was a guy named Jerry Williams who was a radio show host on WRKO in Boston, and he was kind of the proto Alex Jones. I'm a libertarian. I fight for freedoms, and this is government overreach, and blah blah blah. They get a
right,
petition together. They get enough signatures. It goes on a referendum, and we repeal. A year later, we repeal the seatbelt law.
hmm,
So 1986, we went from 86 to 93 without a seatbelt law, and as a result, we not only suffered, greater, highway deaths than most other
sure,
states did, that were now, like, by 93, like 45 states had a seatbelt law.
yeah,
So we had higher percentages of highway deaths because of it. Our usage was 27% versus 68% across the country. And we paid insane insurance rates
oh sure,
to the point where there were a lot of insurers who said, you know what, we're not doing business in Massachusetts at all. And so
Hmm.
you were limited to, like, all of a sudden, like, all of the competition and the capitalism and the marketplace is going to dictate how things go. Now you got three insurance companies to choose from, and
Yeah.
the rates are all up here.
Well,
So
and that is I mean,
it's
that's
capitalism,
capitalism.
man.
These actuaries, an actuary's job. My
Yeah,
same friend who worked at the Pentagon was going to be an actuary. I mean, like an actuary's job is to assess risk
right,
and the likelihood of paying out and how much that payout can be. Some people are like, "Oh, sports cars are more expensive to insure." If people aren't writing those cars off, it's not more expensive
right,
to insure. Like, yes, there's a dollar value, but it's repair costs. It's how likely you are to have a crash. Like, there's all of this other
right.
math that goes into insurance. And if you are more likely to be injured in the state of Massachusetts in a car crash than average, yeah, you're going to
You're going
pay
to pay
more
more.
in insurance.
Yeah.
Like, that's
So,
like,
like, it's
not that
almost
that's
like
right, but it's right.
so I don't believe that in the state of Massachusetts, the police departments are writing, an abundance of tickets to people who weren't wearing their seatbelt, right?
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
a secondary offense, first of all. So you got to get pulled over for something else. And then you have to be dumb enough to not wear your seatbelt, right? To
Yeah.
get a ticket. So they're not doing that. There's not some Gestapo out there trying to, get you to buckle up. So what it
Right.
is it's the opposite effect where, look, if you don't want to wear your seatbelt, don't wear your seatbelt.
Right.
You're probably not going to get caught. Who cares? But for most people, they just go, like for my kids, for example, who are 20 and 15, they wouldn't dream of getting in an automobile without putting their seatbelt on because it's
Right.
just been natural for them since day one,
Yeah. It
and
feels weird when you don't.
feels totally weird. And it feels weird for me now after having done it since 1993. So, it's not like, oh, all of a sudden, we had a seatbelt law and now all of a sudden, you can't own your own house anymore.
Yeah.
There is
Right.
no
Yeah.
slippery slope. It's
But
it's nonsense, right?
in Ohio, it took a while. Like there was a seatbelt law, but it couldn't be the primary reason for you to be pulled over.
Right.
So like law enforcement couldn't use that as a reason. And then at one point it did become a reason, and we could talk about that and
Yep.
taillights out and stuff like that as being, you know, well, we're not going to talk about
Yeah.
policing,
Yeah.
but the yeah, you're just not going to get having the law there and knowing that it's that it's
Right.
that it's quote unquote required for you to do it.
Right.
It makes people put it on,
Right.
and some people don't, and that's fine. Like you don't get caught, you don't get caught. You are taking a risk
Yep.
by not getting not getting caught. Um, you know, impaired driving.
Yeah.
You're it's
Oh, they fought
people.
that too. The same
Yeah.
guy. The same
Oh,
guy. Literally, like, it's a
yeah.
campaign to, save the drunkards of Massachusetts that want to go driving around after, we don't we actually banned happy hours here for from then until now, that we can have a
Right.
happy hour now. But it was because, so, like, man,
Yeah.
like, people are drunk all the time, right?
Yeah.
And so that was another thing, that was another part of this. But I don't know if you noticed this or not, because you kind of haven't been around in this industry as long as I have, but there was a shift in the way the auto industry responded to things like the fuel economy mandate, the
Mhm.
cafe standard increase to 56 and a half miles per gallon.
Right.
So in the 70s, the auto industry fought everything.
Yeah.
Oh, we have to have seatbelts in cars? No, we don't want that. We're passing federal motor vehicle safety standards in 1968. No, we don't want that. They fought it
Yeah.
tooth and nail every step of the way, from fuel economy stuff all through the 80s, all through the 90s, and then all of a sudden in the 2010s there was a bit of a shift where it was like, you know what? If we want to continue to sell cars in the future, we need to do this. We need to be able to continue to sell a product. And now I think what you're seeing is that the oil and gas industry and the automotive industry, they're separate on a lot of things now.
Mhm.
The automotive industry wants to, they would love to build EVs because they see a future
Right.
where, right or wrong, I don't care whether they right or wrong, but these are smart people who are looking at the business. They see a future where these things are going to be a sizable percentage of the automotive
Yeah.
industry. The oil and gas industry is not interested.
Well, why not take advantage of? I mean, we. I'm old enough to know that the cost of building stuff increases throughout your life.
Right.
Like money, inflation, all of that stuff. It's cheaper now to build a factory than it'll be 10 years from now
Yep.
to build a factory. So if the writing's on the wall, if the EVs are happening, I would want to spend precious capital
Sure.
now than spend it later.
Well, and if
Um,
you're an executive in Detroit and you're looking at what's going on in China,
yeah,
you're thinking, man, like we're going to be back in the 80s where, like we wanted to ignore Japanese cars in the,
yep,
late 1970s. We wanted to treat them like a joke and treat them like that they weren't a serious contender, and we got hammered. I mean, it was insane. Like, nobody in their right mind would buy an American car, in that period of,
yeah.
late 80s. The shift was on, and we suffered for it, and I don't want to see that happen again.
Well, I think it's interesting. We're going to take a really, really tiny break to possibly insert a commercial in case one exists. Um, but when we come back, I'd like to talk about that a little bit further because where we talk about capitalism, the way that we are exposed to it here, that's different culturally. Yes, I know Japan isn't. I mean, obviously, there's free market stuff there as well, but like, I think that cultural impact was different because I want to talk a little bit about Toyota, even though sometimes it feels like they're anti EV. They recently joined IANA. I feel like maybe they're kind of coming a little on
Yeah,
board, but when it comes to safety, Toyota has a really interesting record. So we're going to take a really quick break. If you hear a commercial or see a commercial,
good
yay!
for
If you don't,
us.
yeah, if not, we're going to be right back. So, woo! Okay, we're back. How was that commercial? If you
That
experienced
was
it?
amazing.
Great, amazing. You should definitely buy whatever product that was. Though you probably didn't get a commercial. But the software we use for podcasting lets you algorithmically add ads later. So
Yep.
like somebody could download this episode a year from now, and it may have an ad in it, even though if you downloaded a week from now, it didn't. So, um, tooth and nail for safety. It really did. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't covering the industry like I am now, but like I was paying enough attention to know. But then you know what Toyota did? They put safety sense in everything.
Yep.
Rental car spec, everything had autonomous emergency braking way before the mandates.
Yep.
Everything had adaptive cruise control and lane centering and stuff like that, and they didn't charge you for it.
Right.
And they got backup cameras way before the federal mandates. Like they just came over. They just said, "Look, this is going to happen. We need a competitive advantage." So we're just going to make safety free. Well, not free, but you're not going to have to pay more for safety. And no other automaker was doing that at the time. Even Volvo,
Right.
who has this reputation of safety, and they did invent a lot of stuff. Just look at the video on our YouTube channel about it. But the culture, I think there was a bit of a culture
Yeah,
shift.
for
Like
sure.
like,
So
and
so
now,
here's the experience I had in a
mhm,
Mercedes last week. I was driving I can't remember what it was, GLC, I guess it was,
sure,
AMG, like really cool vehicle. Um, it didn't have adaptive cruise control.
right,
It didn't have ventilated seats. Both of those things are optional. And
yep,
I do get in a premium vehicle, like maybe you don't want that. And maybe it's nice to be able to sort of pick and choose
yep,
some things, whatever. But, you can't buy a Subaru without that, without,
right. Eyesight
you know,
standard.
yeah. I mean, and even, the ventilated seats come in, the higher trim
Yeah.
levels, right?
Well,
As it's not an
CarPlay.
option, it's just what it is. Your basic level of equipment in an automobile today, in the cheapest automobile you can buy, is
Mhm.
infinitely higher than it used to be. You
Apple.
used to get in a rental car spec and like
It
they
was
made you
terrible.
feel like you were a cheapskate.
Yeah, the last car I picked up from a rental counter, which isn't often, but, like, it had wireless CarPlay and Android Auto, it had adaptive cruise, it was good,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
like, good, and, if you're being exposed to that brand for the first time and your rental car spec is nice, maybe you're more willing to, I think you could make an argument for some fleet sales for that reason,
Right.
because these aren't rental spec Malibus that are just absolute junk. These are decent
Yep.
cars.
Yeah, and that's
You know,
exactly your point is that, I mean, Toyota with the Star safety system, like they set the bar. And then
yeah,
every other, sort of mass market manufacturer is now forced to catch up. And now they have. And so now, now where does the bar raise to again?
right,
I don't care when anybody says this all works. Like look at death rates
yeah,
from the 1980s, and don't look at the numbers, don't look at the raw numbers because there were fewer
yeah.
cars
Those
out
are, yeah,
there, but the rate
yeah,
is insane when it was,
yeah.
in the 70s and 80s. It was
Yeah,
crazy.
per mile
Yep.
driven, cars are safer than they've ever been. We're still losing a lot of people that we shouldn't be
Yep.
losing, but cars are safer than they have ever been.
Yep.
And you know, uh, I want to make a real quick point about Apple CarPlay. Like, because so many people started to demand it at the general public level,
Yeah.
some people started offering it for free. So now everybody has to offer it for free.
Right.
But like on a Ferrari Pro Segway, it's like $5,000.
Right.
Why? Because they
They can
can.
get the money.
Why does Porsche make more money per car sold than any other automaker? Because they can.
Right.
And um at the volume, at the main level, like, there's automakers are still trying to drive costs down and things like that, and there's lots of ways that they try to do that, but the market is sort of like kind of correcting, and people want safety now, people want reliability now, people are expect that. They expect a car to go 100,000 miles and never have to change the oil.
Right.
Yes, you definitely should, but like, there are people out there that don't.
Yeah.
And so the tolerances and stuff that these engineers are engineering these vehicles for are for longevity. And the thing about EVs, despite what somebody in your area may think, is like, there's less maintenance.
Right.
You don't have to worry about this stuff. You're
Right.
changing tires, some fluids, suspension bits over time, things like that. But you're dealing with arguably a much more reliable vehicle,
Yeah.
and you don't need to worry about every 5,000 miles or
And
10,000 miles
and
changing the oil.
the concern in the beginning was, oh, good, well, the battery, it's going to cost you 20 grand to get
Sure.
that replaced. Well, maybe it did 10 years ago, but
Yeah.
now it doesn't. And the price
Well,
of those cells is like plummeting, right? So
yeah.
it's like
And yes,
$60 per.
yeah, it's something like 60 or something now.
And now, so it's like, and conversely, has anybody ever had to replace a transmission? Because that is the worst possible thing that's going to happen to you in a year.
Right.
It's like
Well,
the cost of that is going like this, and the cost of batteries is coming down almost in exact
yeah.
opposition.
Well, occasionally you'll hear a story about how, let's say, a Canadian EV owner was quoted 60,000 Canadian to
Right.
replace the battery in their Ionic 5. Well, their insurance either covered it or it was covered by the manufacturer. So
Right.
there was no out of pocket cost to them. So that's a moot point.
Right.
And it turns out these EV batteries, now that we're getting more data, tend to last a lot longer than, I mean, definitely a lot longer than they do in your cell phone or other components. This is a good point that Alex made on a previous episode that you should go listen to, is we base the idea of what a lithium ion battery in a car is. We compare that to our phones, to remote
Yeah.
controls, to things like that. None of those are engineered to the same tolerance or life expectancy or anything like that that these batteries in these cars are being regulated to. And thermal management is helping that. My iPhone's 3 years old and has 90% of its original battery capacity.
Yeah. It's
Um,
crazy.
and that's like, an EV is going to be a lot better. You're going to lose just a couple of percent over that period of time. Yes, at some point maybe that battery needs to be recycled, and we're working on ways of doing that. But it just turns out that over time these batteries aren't degrading as quickly,
Yeah.
thanks to the engineering
Well,
going
and
into them.
the worst case is that 100% of them are getting recycled for other purposes.
Yeah,
Like they want them back. They're like, it's like
yeah,
your milk bottles, like, yeah, we'll take them back. We love it.
Yeah. So it's there's just it's a lot of combating because you have to do that and you have to constantly you have to constantly tell people like, hey, this is these are things you don't have to worry
Yeah,
about. This is why. And the reality, and all of these are valid points, and where people should, what people should understand. And then they need to go drive one. They
absolutely.
need to go drive one. And then after you drive one, if you decide, hey, it's not for you, hey, it's not for you. The government's not going to force
Totally
you to do it.
cool. Yep.
But you just might
You're
like it.
doing yourself a disservice by ignoring it at this point. You know,
Yeah.
it's just it is like we said before, the most exciting period in automotive history. Like for me,
Yeah.
for my history, right? Because when I was kind of getting started at this, all cars were the same. It was like the late 90s, early 2000s. Didn't matter
Yep.
who you bought a car from. They were all pretty much the same. They were all
Yep.
beige inside. It was terrible. And now it's like, hey, we got new car companies coming. That's never
Yeah.
happened in my lifetime.
Yeah, especially in this country because it's so difficult to create
Exactly.
a new car company. Where can if people want to hear more from you about you from you of you, I'm sure I'll have you on in the future again.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
like, where can they find you in the meantime?
So definitely
What are you working on?
LinkedIn, and you can follow me on Facebook. I'm taking some break for the summer on Facebook, but I will be back there. And I am the automotive editor at SubaruDrive.com. And there's a bunch of other things that I do too. So definitely catch up with me on LinkedIn and Facebook, though.
Yep, that's Fitzgerald, Fitzgerald. I believe Craig,
Correct.
as in Craig Cole. If you want notes from things we talked about, it'll be in the description box if you're watching this on YouTube. Otherwise, it'll be in the show notes. If you want to support the podcast, please tell your friends to subscribe. Or if you really want to support this podcast, give us your money. That's what we want you to do. Patreon.com/EVPulse. Or the channel subscription on the EV Pulse YouTube page. Both of them have parity. You can get things like early access to episodes. You can get the pre and post show banter stuff that we do, some exclusive content, things like that, and it hopefully helps us pay the bills. So until next time, thank you all for watching. And if I can figure out how to make this thing work, yes, I'm still learning how to use the computer.